muttering was indistinct, but it was a pleasant muttering. It made a reassuring undercurrent below the worry, that terrifying anxiety which was thrusting icy fingers deep into his diaphragm. From where he lay, he could just see a wedge of polished floor, a section of a neat empty bed, and a tall shrouded window. A hospital. At least he knew what a hospital was. That was comforting. "They'll hang him, I suppose," said the woman. "Bound to, miss." The man was both apologetic and definite. "Once a man slugs an officer of police, he's for it. This chap had all that money on him, too. That'll take a bit of explaining on its own." Slugging a policeman. He knew what that meant, whatever condition his mind was in. That was pretty serious. It was so serious that it made him sweat. He glanced at a row of doors on his left. At any moment one of these might open and authority emerge. It was a real nightmare. What on earth had happened to him? He did not remember anything at all. There was only that secret worry, that awful half-recollected responsibility about 15. 15. He had no idea what the figure signified, but it was both urgent and vital. He did know that. Now, to add to everything else, he was going to be hanged for slugging a policeman. He got out of bed and chose the nearest door. His bare feet were silent on the tiles of the passage. He became aware for the first time that coarse hospital pyjamas were his only covering. It was obvious that some sort of clothes were imperative if he were to have a dog's chance with the lurking authority behind those shining doors. At that moment, he found himself in front of a fire cupboard containing a fireman's coat and boots. With practised ease, he teased open the door without disturbing the glass, and took out the clothes. The absence of oilskin trousers bothered him, but the boots were tremendous, and the coat had a belt which could be slipped through the boot loops. The sou'wester cap which fell out of the ensemble struck him as amusing, but he put it on and buttoned the coat up to his throat with deep relief. As the door swung closed, the thin glass splintered. The gentle clatter it made on the tiles was almost musical, but the automatic bell which he had failed to notice above the case shrieked, and from every side, above him and beneath him, other bells echoed it in a monstrous cacophony of alarm. He ran for it, with his oilskin coat flapping and scraping round his hampered limbs. He plunged across the main entrance hall and had almost reached the threshold of the emergency doors when a girl slipped in front of him. "Is it by the gate?" she inquired. He glanced at her over his shoulder and received a momentary impression of a heart-shaped face and disconcertingly intelligent brown eyes. "The fire's at the back, miss. Nothing serious." It was a completely meaningless encounter, but she left an uncomfortable doubt in his mind. He took the nearest car. As he turned east onto the high road, he realized he had picked a terrible one. Somewhere behind him, a suggestive clanking was growing noticeably louder. He had travelled half a mile or so before he became aware of the car behind. He pulled in a little to allow it to pass, but the driver made no attempt to overtake, and appeared to be content to keep at a distance of 25 yards or so. This was definitely alarming. He had no chance even to run for it in these colossal fireman's boots. A sudden dip in the road was his undoing. He hit the water splash at the bottom without seeing it, and a wall of spray rose up over him, rushed in through the radiator, and obscured the windscreen. The engine coughed apologetically and died. He sat where he was. The silence was sweet but uncanny. He waited. Very slowly, the other car crawled down the road behind him, and, entering the water so quietly that there was hardly a ripple, it came up close to him so that the driving seat was on a level with his own. The side windows of the two cars slid down simultaneously, and he braced himself to meet whatever was coming. "Would you care for a lift by any chance?" said a young female voice. "Do you know where we are? We're relying on you. I hope you realize that." The second voice, elderly and querulous, startled half the life out of him. It was so close. "Do you mind getting in the back? Mr. Anskam is in the front with me. We shall be rather late for dinner, I'm afraid. I was waiting in the vestibule, but you'd started off in George's car before I could catch you." She let in the clutch as she spoke, and they moved away into the darkness. Then he realized, of course. She was the young woman with the heart-shaped face and the intelligent light brown eyes who had spoken to him in the hospital vestibule. She must have been trying to tell him that this car was by the gate. No wonder she was treating him now as if he were mentally deficient. So he was, God help him, so he was. "Rather a disturbing adventure, don't you think, Campion?" the old man remarked conversationally. Campion. He seized on the name eagerly and tried to think that it was familiar. He felt for a cigarette. Finding that he had no pockets, he leant forward automatically and discovered in the dark a packet and a lighter tucked into the case at the back of the front seat. He was actually smoking before he realized the significance of his behavior. He must have known the cigarettes were there. The explanation was obvious. He was in his own car. The conviction that the girl was his wife came slowly. The more he thought of it, the more likely it became. Here she was, driving his car, looking after him like a mother, lying for him like a heroine. He was suddenly delighted. The elderly man stirred himself. "I see where we are now. We must have come 15 miles out of our way." He broke off abruptly and laughed. "I mean, 5 miles, of course. I don't know what made me say 15. Anxiety rolled up into Campion's mind once more. 15. "Here we are, anyway." The girl's cool voice was comfortingly matter-of-fact. "If you don't mind, Mr. Anskam, we'll put you down at your gate and rush on to change. We'll see you at dinner, shan't we?" "Yes, yes, I shall be there." Through the window, Campion caught a glimpse of the old man disappearing between high stucco pillars towards a steep, dark house beyond. "Silly little man," said the girl suddenly. "He's left his parcel." "That's all right, I'll take it," Campion said hastily, fumbling for the door handle. "You can't in those clothes." "Yes, I can. He won't see me, or if he does, he'll have to realize I'm an eccentric." He took the square parcel and staggered out after the departing figure. The front door was already closed when he found it, and rather than knock, he laid the package on the step and hurried down the drive to the waiting car again. Now that he was alone with this delightful, if unrecognizable, wife of his, he felt unexpectedly embarrassed about coming to the vital point. "It is all very difficult," he began awkwardly. "I know. I only found out where you were by a miracle. I'd been waiting down at the station as we arranged. What happened? You're not hurt?" "Oh, Lord, no," he said, warmed by her anxiety. "I'm all right, really. I only got knocked out." "Oh, that was it?" she said. "The man in the paper shop simply whispered, 'Hospital.' I say, I'm glad you're all right." She turned the car into a neat, old-fashioned stable-yard. The graceful lines of a large Georgian house were just visible in the faint light. Campion climbed out, stiff and unsteady. As the door closed softly behind them, he suddenly saw her and recognized her, the first real and familiar thing to emerge in the terrifying darkness of his mind. She was suddenly well known and inexpressibly dear to him. "Amanda," he said. "Yes?" She swung round. He laughed. "I only wanted to hear you answer to your name." The smile faded from her face, and he thought she looked a trifle embarrassed. They reached the upper hall, and Amanda opened a door under an archway. "You get dressed, and so will I. I'll give you 10 minutes. I must see you before we go down." Albert Campion went into the room that presumably was his own and looked at the dinner jacket laid out neatly on his bed. The tailor's tab inside the breast pocket assured him that it was his. He thrust the firefighting kit into the bottom of a wardrobe and was about to close the door on it when a sound behind him made him turn. It was Amanda. She was wearing a long, smooth white dress. She was wonderfully easy to look at. "Admiring yourself?" He glanced behind him and saw the point of her remark. The door of the armoire had swung open, revealing a dressing mirror within. "No," he said, and paused abruptly. He had just caught sight of himself and her standing beside him. He was older than he had thought. He saw a horrified man of 35 or so, tall and remarkably thin, with a lean wooden face on which there were far more lines than he had expected. She, on the other hand, might have been still at school. "Albert," she said, "I know this isn't the time, and that all this business going on is far more serious at the moment, but I've got this on my mind, and I want to clear it up. You know you were going to marry me next month." The information appalled him. His disappointment and loneliness were overwhelming. "Was I?" he said flatly. She drew back from him, and for a moment he felt panic-stricken that she was going to walk out and leave him. "Don't," he said wildly. "I didn't mean that, Amanda. I'm completely at sea. I don't know where I am, or who I am, or what I'm doing. Oh, I know." She was herself again, impulsive and warm and friendly. "I know, and I'll see you through this. You can rely on me absolutely all the time. That is true. You do know that." "It's disgusting of me to talk about the marriage when you're nearly off your head with worry about the other thing, but you know how hopeless I am about hiding anything. You see, we've never had a love affair, have we? I've just been going to marry you ever since I was 17. Well, now I want to call all that off. I don't have to explain any more than that, do I?" "How old are you?" he asked. 25. As old as that. And you've been going to marry me for 8 years. "Well, yes. You've been going to marry me for 8 years, and now you're not." If he was a half-wit now, he seemed to have been a lunatic for some considerable time. He could hardly tell her now that he could remember nothing and nobody, and to appeal to pity is very loathsome in love. She put her hand in his. "You're a dear," she said. "I knew you'd be like this. You've always been rather magnificent, Albert, and you still are. I mean that you're a bit sensible, and, well, not exactly cold, but—" "Fish-like," he said bitterly, and let her lead him, lonely and wretched, downstairs towards that sinister other thing which was still lying like an ominous bundle behind the dark curtains of his mind. Campion followed Amanda into the drawing-room. 5 people stood about sipping sherry from beautiful old apple-green glasses. A tall, big-boned man came over to them at once. "Now it's just Anskam to come. I don't think you've met everyone, have you?" It was coming back to him, or some of it was. This man was Lee Aubrey, and this was his house, the principal's house, in the Bridge Institute of General Research, that remarkable and ancient institution which, from being a provincial curiosity, part charity and part museum, for 150 years, had blossomed forth in the early part of the century into one of the most valuable scientific research centres in the country. Lee took him over to the other side of the room, ostensibly to find some sherry. "Rather a depressing assembly, I'm afraid," he murmured diffidently. "The Bridge Institute may do work of national importance, but it's still the so-called philanthropic little plaything of the masters of bridge." Aubrey looked at him closely. "My dear good man, you're exhausted," he said. "For heaven's sake, have a drink. And oh yes, wait a minute, here are your letters. They've been sent on from London." Campion glanced at the letters with a slowly growing sense of satisfaction. All but one were readdressed to him from 17A Bottle Street, Piccadilly. One had come to him direct at the Bridge Institute. "My office, the Yard, Tuesday. Dear A.C., Fancy a man called Anskam is your best bet. He is secretary to the masters. For God's sake, get busy. Keep your eye on the calendar. The figures 15 turn my belly whenever I see or hear them. Nothing else this end. Forced to rely on you only now. If this thing happens, it is the end. And I mean that. Damn you, succeed. S. S. Stanislaus. The name came back to him with relief. But Stanislaus Oates was an old man, a prim, elderly policeman of the oldest school. And he was hysterical. This was truly frightful. Some terrible responsibility rested upon him, and he had no recollection of what it was. Lee Aubrey came hurrying in and accosted him. "The police?" Campion repeated. "I can't see the police now." "But my dear chap," Aubrey's deep voice was urgent. Campion followed him out into the wide hall and saw through an open doorway across an expanse of black and white flags the familiar gleam of silver and blue. "They've come about Anskam," said Aubrey. "The poor old boy has just been found dead in his garden, and you and Amanda appear to be the last people to have seen him alive." Aubrey introduced Campion to County CID Superintendent Hutch. "I just want the usual, you know," the superintendent said cheerfully. "A brief account of your last meeting with the deceased. Where did you leave him, and when?" Campion took the plunge without a pause. Hesitation, he felt instinctively, was death. "I last saw Anskam at his own gate," he began glibly. "We'd come from, the town." "What town?" He had not the least idea. "I think we ought to have Amanda here." "Amanda, sir?" "Yes, my fiancée, Miss—" The hopeless pitfall loomed too late. Lee Aubrey was staring at him. "I had rather hoped to keep Lady Amanda out of this as long as possible. She gave Mr. Anskam a lift into Coachingford when she went to meet Mr. Campion off the London Express. They were delayed and didn't get back until just after 8. These are the brief facts. Mr. Campion can give you anything else you need, I think. You won't need to trouble her at all, will you?" The last words were barely a question. He spoke with the complete assurance of authority. Campion had been sidetracked momentarily by the valuable name Coachingford, but it now dawned on him that as principal of the Bridge Institute, Aubrey was no ordinary power in the land. "I think I ought to see her, sir, if you don't mind." Lee Aubrey clearly found the superintendent's insistence astounding. He swung round on the policeman. "Mr. Anskam died naturally, surely?" Hutch looked uncomfortable. "We're not absolutely certain, sir. He didn't do it himself, that's one sure thing. More I can't say, can I?" Aubrey went out, leaving Campion with the policeman. Campion took a deep breath. "How did Anskam die?" he inquired. The policeman grinned. "We were going to ask you about that, Mr. Campion," he said. In the moment of paralyzed silence which followed, a heavy round man in early middle age appeared in the doorway. "Hello, Super. Mr. Aubrey here. Oh, it's you, is it, Campion? What a bad business, eh?" He had a distinctive, ugly face, and impudent eyes beneath fierce and tufted brows, but for the rest he was as much a stranger as anyone else in this new and confusing world. "I'm supposed to have dropped in for coffee," he said, "but I understand you haven't started to eat yet. He told me this dreadful tale about Anskam, too. Poor old boy, he couldn't face it, I suppose, or am I letting cats out of bags?" The superintendent eyed him. "It wasn't suicide, Mr. Pine." "Wasn't suicide?" The newcomer seemed first astounded, and then embarrassed. "I heard that his job, like all these hereditary offices, took a fine old packet to keep up, and that the old man was on the verge of a smash, and had made up his mind to resign as secretary to the masters. Naturally, as soon as I heard he was a deader, I thought he'd done it himself. The biannual meeting of the masters is sometime this week, too, isn't it?" "Tomorrow." "Is it?" "Very likely. They're such a secret, high and mighty body that they don't trouble to publish a little thing like that, even if they are only a glorified parish council. The superintendent looked frankly scandalized, and Pine, catching Campion's eye, burst out laughing. "I'm sorry. I'm behaving disgustingly. Poor old Anskam. I didn't know him well, of course. You didn't know him at all, did you, Campion?" "I appear to have been the last person to have seen him alive." The remark was not altogether fortunate. Amanda, who followed Aubrey into the room at that particular moment, heard it and said the first thing to come into her head. "I was there too," she said, "unless you saw him in the garden when you followed him in." Everybody looked at Campion. "That's right. I followed him into the garden with a parcel he'd left in the car. I didn't catch him, though, so I put the package on the doorstep and went back." There was another silence after he had spoken, and it was broken by Pine. "What an extraordinary thing to do, old boy," he said, and laughed awkwardly. Campion hesitated, and Amanda leapt to the rescue. "We were so late," she explained. "I was jittering in the car in case we didn't have time to dress. I begged Albert not to be a moment, and he wasn't." "How long would you say you were, sir?" asked the superintendent. "I don't know exactly. A minute and a half, perhaps. I went straight up the path, and I came straight back again." "You didn't meet anyone or hear anything?" "No. What was there for me to hear?" Superintendent Hutch was magnificently deaf to the question. "I think I'll ask you to step across to Anskam's house with me, if you don't mind, sir," he said briskly. "I'd just like to see exactly where you put that parcel." Pine insisted on accompanying Campion and Hutch on the short journey to Anskam's house on foot. It was a ghostly night. When they reached the high stone pillars of the gateway, Pine stood completely still. "Interesting," he murmured to Campion. Campion looked at the gate pillar and saw nothing more than the heraldic leaden eagle on the top. "Charming," he said, and politely glanced at the pillar again. His heart jolted violently. In shallow relief, and now outlined by shadow, the house number showed up clearly. It was 15. "Just show us exactly what you did, sir." Hutch spoke formally. "It was not a big parcel. It measured about 6 by 5, I should think. I took it that it was a couple of books. I left it there on the doorstep." Hutch seemed satisfied. "You just went away without ringing," he remarked. "One does things like that every day," said Pine. "They only sound so jolly fishy when something happens. You're being damned mysterious, Superintendent. There's no question of foul play, is there?" "There's always a question, sir." Hutch sounded reproachful. "I'd like you to see him, Mr. Campion. He's been taken into the house." Campion felt no qualms as he looked down at the body on the solid, old-fashioned mahogany bed. If Campion and the police were stolid, Pine was rattled. "Horrible," he said. "He's broken his neck, hasn't he? How on earth did he do it?" "We found him on his back, lying across the steps on the way down to the lily pond." "As if he'd slipped on the lowest step and hit the back of his neck on the highest," Campion suggested. "Exactly," said Hutch, and glanced meaningfully at the body. Campion knew perfectly well how the man had been killed and what the weapon was which had murdered him. He knew that Anskam had been struck from behind on the base of the skull. The blow must have dislocated the vertebrae, and the actual cause of death was probably asphyxiation. The murderer was an old hand, a killer, a professional. As for the weapon, it must have been a length of lead pipe, possibly stocking covered since there was no mark on the man's collar. With a jerk, a possible solution to this new mystery presented itself to Campion. Suppose he had slugged the policeman. Suppose not only that, but that he had also slugged Anskam. That was what had happened to Anskam, all right. He had been slugged. Campion collected himself. It was absurd. He could not have done it. Even if his mind was not playing him monstrous tricks, he could not have done it in the time. Amanda knew. Amanda had said distinctly that he had come back at once. Pine was bothering him. Pine must know something. After that deliberate question about the 15 on the gatepost, Pine must know. Campion knew he must tease him out. "Not much like the old days," he said heartily. "When we were in the States together, you mean?" "Yes." So they were old friends. That was the main thing. At the Institute gates, Pine took his leave, and Hutch turned to Campion. "I wasn't quite accurate up at the house when I said we hadn't found the parcel. I wanted an excuse for getting hold of you. We had found it, of course, just exactly where you'd put it. Do you know what it contained?" He bent closer. "Close on £4,000 in cash," he said softly. "I found it interesting because we had another case earlier today in Coachingford when a lot of money cropped up. It's been a very funny business altogether over there, with one of our fellows laid out and an unknown in hospital. I wonder at that fellow Pine sticking to us like that," he said earnestly. "Curiosity seems to drive some people off their onion. You wouldn't think any man would thrust himself forward like that, would you? He told me he only met you 3 days ago." Campion sat on his bed with the door open, as if he were a schoolboy in the throes of a first love affair. Until that moment he had not properly assimilated Amanda's announcement of earlier in the evening. She meant what she said. She was not going to marry him. Beside this actual disaster, all the other inconsistencies, the mad cat-and-mouse behaviour of the police, the too friendly Pine who had tricked him into a betrayal, faded into fantasy. He got off the bed and walked out of the upper hall. He went over to the banister without hesitation and looked down. Lee Aubrey, his host and principal of the Bridge Institute, had taken Amanda's hand and was swinging it backwards and forwards. "Good night, Lee," she said, sounding positively schoolgirlish in an effort to be matter-of-fact. Then, turning away, she hurried upstairs to arrive pink and a little breathless before Campion in the upper hall. "What's the matter?" she demanded. "What's happened?" "I want to talk to you." "All right, what is it? I say nothing else awful, surely." She appeared to expect disaster, and hurried into his room as if she thought to find concrete evidence of it there. "There's one thing you've got to tell me," he said. "I've been trying to find out all the evening." "What?" "What day is it?" She stared at him. "Did you hang about on the staircase simply to ask me that? You're behaving rather extraordinarily, aren't you?" He was, of course. He saw that the moment she pointed it out. To the uninstructed, his behaviour and the all-important question could have only one explanation, that he was acting like a jealous child. He felt unreasonably angry with her for his own helplessness. "I want to know the day and the date of today," he said doggedly. "You're the only person I dare ask. What is it?" "It's the 13th, I think." She was furious, and the dignity which her control lent her was the coldest thing on earth. "Friday, I suppose." "No, Tuesday. Now I think I'll go to bed." Tuesday the 13th. That meant Thursday the 15th. A day. A day to do what? Amanda moved over towards the door. A great surge of desire for comfort from her broke over him. It was on his tongue to risk everything and come out with the awful truth about his amnesia when her next remark silenced him. "I'm sorry I behaved so badly. I've got a bit self-centered. I thought you were playing the fool because I was falling in love with Lee." She spoke without any affectation and was free from any suggestion of the coyly blunt. Her eyes were as candid as her words. "Are you?" "I think so." "Why?" "He loves me so, and since he's a great man, because he is brilliant, you know, well, that makes it pretty irresistible." She paused and shook herself. "Let's not discuss it. Tell me about Anskam." "He was murdered." "What?" She sat staring at him. "But that's impossible. Who did it?" "I don't know." "Of course, you're under oath, and that's final. I don't mind. I know you well enough to work under sealed orders. Otherwise, I'd hardly have done the unforgivable thing and got Lee to invite us down here without telling him you were working on something in the town. I've got your assurance that it's desperately important. That's good enough." Campion was standing with his back to her and did not dare look round. "How did you get on at Coachingford?" she inquired at last. He shrugged his shoulders, and she nodded gloomily. "Like that," she said. "Never mind. I don't like this Anskam business, though. That's horrible. Just when we thought he knew something." He turned on her. "What made you think he knew something?" "I don't know. I just got that impression." "Not 15? 15?" She seemed surprised. "15 what?" After she had gone, he wondered why he had not confided in her. It was not only because of Lee, and because he dreaded her pity as he dreaded insufferable pain. There was another reason. It was a fear. If she knew of his mental state, if she knew he was accused of killing a policeman and had it presented to her with the facts as they both knew them about Anskam's death, then would she still regard him with that candid trust which was the most precious thing about her? The whistle cut into his thoughts. The low note, which was just sufficiently unlike a bird's to be uncanny, sounded twice before it brought him to his feet. "Is that you, sir?" The voice was very quiet and came from directly beneath his window. "Are you ready? We'll have to get a move on if we're to get the job done tonight. Can you come at once?" "What?" Yes, all right, I'll be with you in a moment." Campion went downstairs with the soft-footed tread of a professional burglar. In his mind was a single, unqualified question mark, for the voice had been the utterly unmistakable one of Superintendent Hutch. If this was arrest, the whole world was as light-headed as he was. The superintendent's jaunty figure emerged from the black shadows round the house and dropped into step beside him. They turned away from Anskam's house at the end of the drive and plunged off downhill into the picturesque town. As they turned across a wide market square, which might well have decorated any calendar, the policeman opened out a little. "Do you understand the position of the masters in this town?" "No," said Campion truthfully, "I'm afraid I don't. Most of the offices are hereditary, aren't they?" "All of them." Hutch appeared to respect the fact. "It's a very interesting survival. Their records go back nearly 500 years. Bridge is the only example of what you might virtually call a free city in the British Isles. Other than London, of course. That fellow Pine, he called the masters a glorified municipal council, you may remember. So he can, but if he realized how glorified they are, he'd keep his mouth shut like the rest of us. They're kings. That's what they are, little kings. Between them, they own the whole place, and the Institute makes them rich. They own the land, they appoint the magistrates, they control the licenses, and it's their say-so. They got a finger in all sorts of pies. They're thick as thieves with the government, and in fact I shouldn't be surprised if they weren't one of the most powerful bodies in the whole country in their own quiet way. That's why our little job tonight is so delicate. We haven't got too much time, either. This way, sir. It's quicker." Where they were going so fast and so secretly remained a complete and utter mystery to Campion. Hutch drew him down a narrow alley. Another sharp turn brought them out into the open moonlight again, and Campion, still with his new child's eyes, was brought up short before what is perhaps one of the most dramatic natural pictures in England. The bare hill rose up stark and unexpected, like the head of the giant horse it is said to resemble. The nag. By the light of the moon, it was breathtaking. "I had a call from Coachingford," Hutch said. "They're having a bit of a manhunt all round here tonight. Chap slugged a policeman, stolen car abandoned on the high road, and all the rest of it. They'll pick him up in the morning when they can see what they're doing. They're circulating a full description. Here we are, sir, this way." Campion had started like a cat. He noticed with concern, and he had a conviction that his nerves were not usually so unreliable. They had taken a side-turning which ran around the eastern base of the nag. This street was particularly ancient, and here the buildings hung together, shrinking into the very sides of the hill. The superintendent took Campion's elbow and led him into a minute alley which ran down between the shop and its neighbour. At the end of the alley they came into a yard. It was little more than a well, with the nag rising sheer on one side and the building crowding down upon them on the other. Hutch produced a torch no larger than a rifle cartridge. Its pinpoint beam lit up a keyhole in a surprisingly modern door set in an ancient frame. A short key slid into position and the lock turned over. They passed inside into the spicy, slightly rancid atmosphere of a storeroom. They seemed to go on walking for some time. Another door brought them to a flight of wooden stairs and a surprising change of atmosphere. It was a long climb, and Hutch began to relax some of his elaborate caution. "We're right in the hill now," he said unexpectedly. "You wouldn't think it, would you? We'll go right on up to the council chamber, shall we? There's nothing much down here." "Is this the only entrance?" inquired Campion faintly. "Not likely." Hutch paused in his stride. "You know about that, surely." "Excuse me, sir, but don't you know your guidebook? I thought everyone knew about the doors of bridge, as they call them. It's one of the features of the place. For those 4 doors, each one marked by an innocent-looking house, give it a sort of romantic touch, if you see what I mean." "What houses?" inquired Campion, who appeared to have given up subterfuge. "Well, there's the pub, for one." Hutch was torn between astonishment and delight at the discovery of such ignorance. "The old nag's head is built right across the main door. That's the ceremonial entrance where the masters go in on a meeting night. Then there's the gatehouse. The 3rd door is off the rectory. It's a sort of gallery there next to the church. And the 4th lies behind the Wayne house, farther off down the street. Mr. Phillips, who is the hereditary groom, lives there. It's all very old world and out of the ordinary if you come to it new. But, of course, when you're as used to it as we are, you don't see anything in it. It's just a custom, that's all." "We came in by a 5th door, then," Campion murmured. "We came in by the back door," said Hutch firmly. "Not many people know about it. I came in that way tonight because it seemed safest. I don't want to have to give a lot of explanation, and I'm sure you don't. This is the last step, sir. Now to your right." Hutch swept a broad beam of light round them, and Campion stepped back. The place was enormous. It was church-like and colossal. He received a confused impression of black panelling, full-length portraits of heroic size, and overhead canopies of ragged banners, still bright and gallant after their passage down the centuries. The centrepiece turned out to be a table. It was a mighty affair of glistening black oak encircled by 25 chairs. "Well, sir," Hutch sounded a trifle breathless, "here you are. I've risked my warrant to get us in, and I hope you'll forgive me if I say for God's sake get whatever you have to do done as soon as possible, so we can get out before the light. I don't like to think what would happen if we got caught. No one would lift a finger for us. But you know that even better than I do, I expect." Campion did not move. Since he had evidently engineered this illegal entry himself, and had apparently persuaded a superintendent of police to break the dearest law in the British Constitution in order to achieve it, it must obviously have some vital importance, and he himself must possess much more than ordinary influence. There was something he had to do here. More probably, something he had to find out, and there was no knowing what stupendous matters hung upon his success. Already it was long past midnight. The morning of the 14th had begun. The 15th, as far as he knew, was 0 hour. It came to him that he must lay his cards on the table, admit his amnesia, and take the consequences. He turned to Hutch, prepared to speak, but as the first difficult words formed in his mind, the superintendent began again. "I don't like to criticize," he said. "We're instructed to give you every assistance no matter what you ask, and so we will. But it would make things simpler if the chief constable and I had a glimmer of what you were up to." He paused hopefully, but when the man before him did not reply, went on earnestly. "Look at that Anskam business this evening, for instance. I haven't been in the force for close on 30 years without being able to recognize a corpse which has been slugged when I see one. But what am I to do? There's a ready-made loophole there, and that young doctor seems willing to accept that he fell down and broke his neck, so I can let the whole investigation collapse without any trouble. But am I right in doing that? Is it in the country's interest, or is it nothing to do with the case? I don't know. I'm asking you. I'm in the dark. I can't tell you, Campion said helplessly. Don't you understand? I am simply unable to tell you. Hutch stiffened. He was like a soldier at attention. Very good, sir, he said. I'm in your hands. Carry on. Campion glanced towards the papers neatly arranged on the table in the vast hall and experienced his first ray of hope. On the top of the pile was a fold of foolscap neatly headed, Masters of Bridge, Agenda. By the light of the torch he read the list of items down for discussion at the morrow's meeting. It began archaically enough with prayers to Almighty God, and went on to the orthodox Senior Master's opening remarks, minute of the last meeting, and correspondence. Main business of the evening, he read, and saw underneath it, in a large, carelessly drawn circle in red ink, the haunting figure 15. He refolded the sheet, put it back into position, and stepped back. His knees were trembling. It was all here, he felt certain, all under his hand, and yet he could not recognize it. The other half of the talisman was lying just out of his reach in the monstrous darkness of his own brain. Campion peered round him in the gloom. There are other rooms, of course. This is the only actual habitable room, sir. The others are only caverns, storerooms. I see. I'd like to go on a bit, though. Is that possible? They passed on into a passage, and thence an iron ladder took them down into the master's storerooms. A brief inspection disclosed that the main use to which the masters put their space was the storage of wine. They must have done themselves proud for generations. I bet there's a fortune here. As a matter of fact, they do own vineyards all over the world, I've heard. Superintendent Hutch's 2 torches disclosed pile upon pile of small packing cases, each sealed and labelled with a grower's name. He gasped. There's a cargo of it, he said, sounding thoroughly shocked. A perishing cargo. Hello, sir. What's the matter? Campion had paused in the middle of a step. His body had become rigid, and he stood immovable, his head raised. Listen, he whispered. What is it, sir? A petrol engine. Listen. Very faint, so muffled that it was more of a sensation than a sound. The throbbing reached them. It's beneath us. Campion went on alone, moving like a wraith, but very quickly, with a sure-footed stealth which betrayed long practice. The throbbing had ceased, but in the cold underground air there was a slight but unmistakable breath of exhaust. He went down the ladder for what seemed a very long way, and found himself in a passage no wider than his outstretched arms. The fumes were much stronger now, and mingling with them was the fresh, sharp tang of the sea. What he saw was so unexpected that he almost dropped the torch. He was on a narrow ledge, high up on the rock wall of a cave. Directly below him was something under 300 3-ton lorries of varying types and ages, but clearly in good running order and ready for the road. And he saw the face of a man, crouching back into the shelter of an overhanging cab. It had been a white face in the bright light, and it had been familiar. It had flashed into his vision, bringing a name with it, a name and a deep feeling of no enthusiasm. Weaver B. His head ached maddeningly, and he was not too certain of his legs. As he felt his way up the narrow iron ladder, he tried to assimilate what he had seen since entering the nag. There was the number 15 on the agenda, That must be of interest. And the man he had just seen, if his presence was normal, why had he hidden? He struggled on, and by the time he heard the superintendent's heavy breathing just ahead of him, he had made up his mind. There was only one course open to him, which was not criminally negligent. He must get in touch with Deputy Commissioner Oates at the Yard at once. He ought to have done that immediately on receipt of Oates's warning letter, of course. He felt definitely ill. His head was throbbing, and his body ached. Hutch caught him as he stumbled. "You've overdone it, sir. That's what you've done. We're just by the station. You'll have to sit down. You can't go on forever without sleeping or eating. No one can." A police sergeant met them on the doorstep. He turned to Campion anxiously. "There's a personal call waiting for you, sir," he said. "It's from headquarters. Can you manage it? You all right?" Campion had no clear impression of his passage through the station. He came back to himself as he sat staring into the black mouthpiece of the shabby telephone. "Yeo here, Mr. Campion. Have you got the chief with you?" "Oates?" "Yes, sir. He's gone. We can't find him. He left his room here in the small hours of yesterday morning and hasn't been heard of since. Is he with you?" "No, he's not here." There was a long pause. The faraway voice spoke again. "Then it's you alone now, sir. You're the only one now who can do anything. None of the rest of us here even know the full strength. The chief was in sole control of his agents." Campion slipped forward across the table, his head in his arms. When he woke, he was in his room in Lee Aubrey's house at the Bridge Institute. By the time he staggered downstairs, he was fairly clear about his immediate plan of campaign. The masters of bridge were his best bet, mysterious though they were. They knew the secret of 15 if anyone did, since they were making it their main business of the evening. His host, Lee Aubrey, must be persuaded to tell him all there was to be known about the masters. He found Aubrey in the brown and yellow morning room, and they set off for a tour of the Institute. They achieve almost international status, financially at any rate, don't they? Campion spoke unguardedly. Lee raised his head and gave him one of his surprisingly intelligent stares. "They're very wealthy, of course," he said primly. "Financially, the masters have had their bad periods, but they've never gone quite under. Their basic line is so good." "What's that?" Aubrey seemed astounded that he should ask. "Patents, of course," he said. "Patents?" "Well," he was laughing a little, "it was monopolies to begin with, naturally. The masters got a monopoly on the manufacture of godly looms from Queen Elizabeth, and it revolutionized the wool-weaving industry over here, speeding up the production by about 500% and making the town's fortune. Just now, things are more than booming, naturally. The Carter cheap process for extracting petrol from coal is going to be an enormous thing, and we've got one or two pleasant little explosives on the carpet. The whiskey bottle you can't refill is another one of ours, too. That's a great money-maker." "I don't approve of the masters in principle," Lee was saying pedantically. "I don't like pockets of wealth like that in the country. But to do these fellows justice, their little constitution does good work." They had reached the private road leading to the Institute, a cluster of roofs surrounded by a high moss-grown wall. A soldier with fixed bayonet stood on guard before the ornamental iron gates. Lee Aubrey smiled at the man as they passed. "Where do we go first?" asked Campion absently. "My dear fellow, that's entirely up to you. My instructions are that I'm to show you anything that you care to see. Take your choice. Before you is the library, the office, the filing department, and the drafting rooms. And right over there, as comfortably distant as space will permit, is the star turn of the moment. The Warhouse's little white-headed boy, our young master butcher, mucking about with Anderton's latest variety of potted hellfire. It's incredible stuff. Half a teaspoonful can make as much mess as a bucketful of TNT, hence the sentry on the door." He paused expectantly, and Campion stood irresolute. As far as he could see, the whole thing was being handed to him on a plate, and yet he could not put his finger on it. Butcher himself turned out to be a cheerful youngster with the face of a ploughboy and thick pebbled glasses. He had a youthful respect for Aubrey, whom he clearly admired, and was pleased to show his laboratories and workshops. "These are the best of the bunch. I keep them in their racks because they really are pretty sensational. We call them phoenix eggs. Don't drop it, old man, will you? I could hit that old museum over there with this, and after the balloon had gone up, oh boy, you wouldn't know it. This is refined warfare, that's what this is." Whatever Butcher knew was also known already, presumably by the War Office, and was therefore none of Campion's business. What he must be looking for was something that was hitherto unknown to them. 15? He must keep his mind clear and hang on to that. 15, that was still his only definite clue. 15, and the people who knew what it meant. Butcher was evidently not one of them. But there was someone else who was. "Look, there's that fellow Pine," said Campion. "Really?" Lee Aubrey's distinctive face clouded. "What on earth is the man doing wandering round here alone like this?" "Who is he?" "Pine? Oh, rather an interesting bird, remarkably intelligent in his own way, probably dishonest, works like a fiend. He's evacuated his office down here. It's an amusing little organization. He calls it Surveys. I suppose you've heard of it?" "It's faintly familiar," said Campion, not untruthfully. "What do they do?" "They're an advice and information bureau. If you want to build a factory or start up a business in an unknown locality, they'll get out all the dope on the place for you. They're remarkably thorough, all in the strictest confidence. Pine told me once that he had 10,000 agents all over England." Pine was almost upon them. He was still hearty, but now there was suppressed anxiety and a touch of antagonism there as well. He greeted them without preliminaries. "Well, what about last night? What about Anskam?" Anskam and his disturbing manner of dying had gone clean out of Campion's mind. Good God, he had forgotten that. What else had he overlooked? Pine wiped his forehead. "I don't like the look of that death. If the police are satisfied, of course, it's nothing to do with me, but I rather wondered if they were." Pine glanced at Campion. "Murder was the thought in my mind," he said. "There's been a manhunt all over this district for the last 12 hours at least," he remarked presently as they walked on. "A fellow wanted by the police escaped from St. Jude's Hospital in Coachingford last night. He pinched an old car, abandoned it at the water splash on the Lower Bridge Road, and disappeared. They're still searching for him. Doesn't that strike you as suspicious?" Lee burst out laughing, an almost feminine spitefulness in his amusement. "Oh, come," he said, "that's childish, Pine. It won't wash. You're upset, my dear chap." "Have you read the description of the man the police are looking for?" Pine continued. "The man they want is 35 years old and 6'2" high. He has a pale face and sleek blonde hair, and his chief characteristics are that he is very thin and yet powerful." He paused, and Campion felt sick. "When last seen, he was wearing fireman's oilskins." The plump man turned to Campion. "What name would you put to that description?" Pine persisted. He was waiting for an answer. Campion could not think. Good God, he could not think. This was horrible, terrifying. What name? What name? What name? "Almost any, I should say," he murmured, unaware that he sounded more bored than anything else. "John Smith, Albert Campion, Weaver B." There was complete silence. Weaver B. The man Campion had seen crouching beside a lorry in the cave under the nag. The ridiculous name, which had slipped out so dangerously, did not seem to have registered upon Lee. But with Pine it was very different. For the first time his shining composure was destroyed. "I've obviously made an idiotic mistake, Mr. Campion," he said. "You and I ought to have a talk. Why don't you come down to my office sometime?" Campion was silent. He had no illusions whatever about Pine. The man was on the right track and knew it. It was a tight corner. Delay at this point was the one thing he knew would be fatal. And delay there certainly would be once the county police discovered in him the particular man for whom they were scouring the country. Campion saw Superintendent Hutch as soon as he turned into the yard at Aubrey's house. The plainclothes man was sitting on the running board of a huge old Buick. "Hello." Campion's greeting was unusually hearty. Here at least was an ally. Hutch eyed him curiously. "I'd like you to take a look at this, if you will." It was a short, typewritten message. "Dear Superintendent, when the Home Office issued you with instructions concerning Albert Campion, did they by any chance also send you a photograph? That's all. Think it over." There was no signature, and it was undated. Campion read it through twice. It was Pine, of course, and the inference was obvious. Pine suspected him of impersonation of Albert Campion. Hutch produced another paper. This proved to be a police chit which detailed the chief physical characteristics of the man who had escaped in fireman's oilskins from St. Jude's Hospital, Coachingford. "I haven't got a warrant, of course," he said at last, "so I'd like to ask a favour of you. May I go over your room, sir, just to satisfy my own curiosity? Well, to put it frankly, sir, when I was getting you to bed last night, I noticed the whole room reeked of oilskins. I can't get that out of my head." Campion laughed aloud. "Just answer me 2 questions, sir, then I'll apologize." "Anything you like, Superintendent." "What is the name of the CDI in room 49 at headquarters?" Yeo. The name had been dragged up out of his mind as he forced himself to hear again the small voice on the telephone the night before. Hutch stood looking at him oddly. There was no way of telling whether he had succeeded or failed. "And the second?" "What's your own SS number, sir?" Campion smiled. He had no idea in the world. "At the moment, I rather fancy it's 15, he said, and laughed. His tormented mind shuddered. There was nothing for it. He hit out. It was a beautiful, expert's blow which rippled from his left shoulder with the entire weight of his body behind it. Hutch went down like a tree, a silly expression of astonishment still on his face. From that instant he moved automatically. He stepped into the Buick, trod on the accelerator, and took the drive at 60. He entered the big industrial town of Coachingford and drove without hesitation through a knot of tiny streets. He abandoned the car at an open garage, crossed the road, turned down an alley, and pressed on until he paused before a small and dirty shop. He glanced up and down the road and then went inside. He had no idea where he was, nor how or why he had come. The grey-faced shopkeeper cleared his throat nervously and came edging round the counter. "You'll want the boss," he said. "Come inside." The room at the back of the shop was very small and dark. Sitting at a table, collarless and in shirt-sleeves, was a very remarkable person. He had a white, melancholy face, hung beneath a glistening, bald skull, and his eyes, which were narrow and expressionless, were as dull as coal dust. At the moment he was engaged in cleaning and oiling a heavy service revolver. He raised his eyes as the door burst open. "So you come back, have you?" said the man. He came round the room and peered into the newcomer's face. "Eh?" he said at last. "Come here. You've had a cosh, haven't you? How bad are you?" His concern was genuine and intensely practical. "Who the hell are you?" Campion murmured. "God almighty, are you kidding? Do you know who you are yourself?" There was a tremor in the thick voice so near his ear. "Campion. It's written in my suit." "Lummy." There was a brief pause while the older man assimilated the salient facts. Then he took command. "Come on," he said, "get your collar off and lie down. I'm going to put you on the sofa and cover you up while I get a doctor." "No, can't have a doctor, can't have any officials. They're all after me by now. Who? The police. Rozzers? You made a mistake. You're punch-drunk. What have you done? Slugged a copper. 2 coppers. The last one was the local super, a dear good chap. I can't have killed him. Campion closed his eyes and was lost. He came to himself to find the fat man, whoever he was leaning over him with a steaming jug of strong old-fashioned beef tea. You remember anything at all before you got your cosh? No, nothing. That is, I remember odd things, and I remember the one thing, of course. I remember 15. 15? The little black eyes were suspicious. That's more'n I do. That's something you never told me. Who are you? The fat man did not reply for a minute. He was deeply and sentimentally hurt. My name is Lug, he said at last. I've been your perishing servant for 17 years. There was an awkward pause. How late is it? I can't waste time. Campion was struggling to his feet as he spoke. Tomorrow's the 15th. Must get on. God knows how. You stay where you are. Lug had picked up his revolver and was playing with it carelessly. Your head seems to have gone, so we'll have to use mine for a ruddy change. My instructions from you in London was that I should keep myself under cover here and take all messages. Now listen, since I've been here, you've only showed up twice. The first time was the day before yesterday. You changed here into some duds that even my old dad wouldn't have worn and went off with a little fish basket under your arm, looking like a tramp. Don't you remember? No, I don't. I'm sorry, it's gone completely. Never mind, never mind. The second time I saw you, you came sneaking in by these French doors here about 3 yesterday morning. You seemed worried and distant-like. About 11 in the morning, you slipped out again, still in your old clothes, and that was the last time I saw you right in the head. You left your little old basket, you locked it in the table drawer, but you took 1 or 2 things out of it and put them in your pockets. About tea-time yesterday, the shopkeeper came in with a tale that he picked up in the shop about you being mixed up in a row down at the waterside. A rozzer had been killed, and 2 or 3 men took to hospital. Campion shook his head. He still could not remember. Lug breathed gustily. Never mind, he said again, but without any sort of conviction. Never mind, it will come back sudden. Then young Amanda called for your suitcase with your good clothes in it. Yes, I know, she came to the hospital. Campion saw the small black eyes flicker. Oh, you've seen her, have you? Did you recognize her? The jealousy was very faint, but it was there, and Campion noticed it. Not for a long time, he said. Like a fool, I thought she must be my wife, but I rather think that's off. She broke the engagement. I see that coming, Lug remarked brutally. It was your fault for mucking about. Courting a woman's like cooking something. There comes a time when it's done. He paused and glanced at the other man's face. Sorry, cock, he said abruptly. Where's the basket? Asked Campion. He squatted down and poked at the lock. He pulled out a wide drawer, revealing a fair-sized rush bag lying inside. Campion thrust his hand in the basket. A slippery, feathery heap of old £1 and 10-shilling notes appeared before him. £684 exactly, said Lug. I counted it after you left. Campion took up a banknote and rubbed it between his fingers. Its shabbiness suggested months of circulation. There was a gentle thud outside the inner door, and the shopkeeper put his head in. Take sights, he whispered. They're all round the house. Plain clothes, rozzers. There was a quiet, insistent tapping on the French windows. Lug picked up his gun. Hello? He demanded suspiciously. Lug backed slowly into the room, and the newcomer came in after, fluttering a white rag ostentatiously before him. As soon as the window was closed behind him, he held up his hands. You can take my gun, he said. Lug searched him promptly and efficiently, setting down the man's heavy Webley on the table, well within the circle of light cast by the hanging light above them. Then, with a glance at his visitor, he produced his own gun and put it down beside the first. There was a long pause, and then Campion also stretched out a hand in the darkness and added his weapon to the other two. He kept his face out of the light, however, as did the newcomer. "I got a message for the man calling himself Campion," the man announced at last. "That's you, isn't it?" "Never mind which of us it is," corrected Lugg sharply. "What's the dope?" "He knows," the newcomer repeated, and one of his repellent hands slid inside his raincoat. The two others had their guns up off the table like one man. They waited. The man's hand came out of his coat with something in it. He laid his offering on the red tablecloth, and they all looked at it. It was a thick packet of old banknotes, secured with a rubber band. "$2.50, he said, "and we ask no questions." "Chicken feed," said Lugg thickly. And two more packets of notes appeared on the table. And finally a fourth. "That's the limit," said the stranger at last. "Take it or leave it. Suit yourself." "And supposing it's a deal?" "He quits his racket and gets out." "Where to?" "London. Hell, anywhere. We're not fussy." The stranger belonged to a very definite class. He was a thug. The question now was, what sort of organization was he working for? It was obviously antisocial, but how large, how dangerous? Campion pulled himself up, despair facing him. He knew so horribly little, even about himself. For instance, what sort of man was he, if this enemy should so confidently expect to be able to bribe him? A possible explanation of that final question occurred to him. It was so absurd and yet so likely that he laughed outright. Bending forward suddenly, he allowed the full light from the chandelier to fall upon his face. It succeeded. The effect on the man was immediate and sensational. "Campion," he ejaculated in a thin voice. "Campion. You are Campion." He dived forward to snatch up his gun, but Lugg was before him, bringing down his own revolver across the grimy wrist as it shot out over the cloth. The man sobbed once, deep in his throat, with pain, and then he turned and rushed from them, leaving gun and money still on the table. "What do you know about that?" Lugg said at last. "I know him, and I'd like to know who he's sold his dirty little soul to this time. You know him all right, too. That was Weaver B." Campion thought of the fleets of trucks in the hidden garage under the nag, and he nodded. It was Weaver B he'd seen crouching behind one of them. His brain was working feverishly. It was Pine again, of course, who must be behind this. Pine was the man who had assumed that he was another crook trying to muscle in on a racket by impersonating Albert Campion. What about Pine, then? What about his questions and his amusing organization, and his snooping about at the Institute? Lugg gathered up the cash on the table and rolled back the cloth. "Wicked to waste it," he remarked virtuously. The drawer was only just closed when the shopkeeper appeared behind them. "I've got something for you." He presented a long, narrow ledger book. He pointed to the final entry made in his own handwriting. "A.C., it ran. "The White Hart, private sitting room, immediately. Come clean." "I'll give you a couple of hours," said Lugg. "If you're not back, then I'll come and save your ruddy life again. Won't be the first time. Don't forget you're not writing ahead now, either." Campion set out wearing a shabby raincoat and a peaked cap provided by the shopkeeper. At the White Hart, a young man in an ill-fitting tailcoat led him up the staircase and knocked on the door of a room on the landing. Campion went in. A little old woman stood before him. "This is so awkward," she murmured. "I don't think we've met." They shook hands and stood looking at one another. "It's all been such a shock," she said unsteadily. At that moment, an inner door, which he had not noticed before, opened, and, as though in direct answer to prayer, his fiancée, Amanda, stood on the threshold. She was lovely. She was kind. She was friendly, a right thing in a ghastly, unrealistic world. That was it. She was an oasis. "Oh, beautiful," he said. Her fine eyebrows rose into arcs on her forehead. "I heard your voice," she said. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here when you came. Have you and Miss Anskam met? I've got Miss Anskam to come along herself to tell you one or two things, Albert." His memory had deserted him. He sighed. "Why?" he added disastrously. "Well, naturally, Albert." Amanda caught the dropping brick with both hands and struggled with it manfully. "I mean, since her brother's death, she's been frightfully hurt and shaken." Her brother. Miss Anskam, of course. He understood at last. This must be the sister of the murdered man. "Well, that's why I've come here now," said the little old woman, "to talk about poor Robert. We shall never know how he died. He was a very weak person in some ways, and if he had taken his own life, I should have been very sorry and very hurt. But I should not have been surprised." "Was your brother frightened of something?" he demanded. "He had something on his conscience," she said. "I always felt he was just going to confide in me, but he never did." "Tell Albert about the money," put in Amanda. "He never told me that he was in financial difficulties, but it was very obvious some little time ago," she began. "He was quite sick with worry, naturally, for we had a certain position in the town to keep up. Also, he had the secretaryship of the Masters of Bridge to think of. That is a very sacred responsibility, Mr. Campion." "I suppose it is." "Our family have thought so for 7 generations," she said stiffly. "If you don't realize what it must have meant to him to resign that office, you can hardly appreciate anything I'm trying to tell you." "He does understand," cut in Amanda hastily. "He's terribly tired and worried himself." What had Anskam known? Didn't his sister realize that there was no time to waste? He could have shaken the facts out of her and was within an ace of telling her so when she spoke again. "When my brother suddenly became comparatively wealthy again, I was astounded," she said. "I knew then that things were not at all as they should be. We come of a class, Mr. Campion, which never acquires money suddenly except by legacy. For a little while my brother was almost happy, but gradually a great change came over him. His conscience was haunting him." "What did he do?" Campion asked. "I'm not perfectly sure, but I'm afraid poor Robert sold his honour and his integrity, Mr. Campion. I think he must have used his position as Secretary of the Masters to permit some sort of smuggling to go on in those caves under the Nag. And then, later, I think he changed his mind and was trying to expiate the sin he had committed. I don't know how he died. If it was an accident, it was the hand of God, but if he took his own life, or if someone else killed him, I shouldn't be in the least surprised." Campion felt the muscles at the corners of his jaw contracting. This was truth. This was a break, at last a real break, if only he had the wits to assimilate it. "Smuggling what?" he inquired. "I don't know. I mustn't mislead you," she said. "I think his conscience slept until he heard of 15. 15. His voice failed, and he whispered the word. 15 again, if only he could remember its significance. She ignored the interruption. "It must have been then that he saw his terrible mistake. I think he did everything he could after that. He decided to resign his secretaryship. He drew out every penny he had in the bank, and he was bringing it back with him yesterday, when you drove him home." Campion was not listening to her. His ears were still tingling from the shock of hearing that one most elusive, most tantalizing word of all, the keynote and symbol of the whole maddening enigma. Tomorrow is the 15th, he said stupidly. I didn't refer to the date. The old lady made the remark with complete conviction. I don't know exactly what 15 refers to, but it isn't a day of the month. How do you know? Because of the diary. She had been holding the little pocket-book all the time, and he had not noticed. Campion took the book, and Amanda looked over his shoulder. Friday the 7th, they read. Just heard of minute 15. See it all. What have I done? The following pages were blank, until they came to the space allotted to the day before the one on which its owner had died. Done, he had written. Done at last. Conscience clearer. Resigned. Expiation must follow. Shall I see Henry Bull? On the following page of the diary, and right across the 3 days it represented, 2 words had been scribbled large. Minute 15. Campion sat down. He felt flat and exhausted. If the 15th was not a date, there was no hurry. Miss Anskam patted Amanda's hand. I don't know if I've been helpful, but at least I've cleared my conscience without giving poor, miserable Robert's mistakes over to the police. Wait. Campion was still clinging to the pocket diary. Who is Henry Bull? Both women stared at him. Miss Anskam looked startled. Sir Henry is a Conservative and one of the Tay family, she said. At the moment, he's the senior master of bridge and a junior lord of the treasury. Don't be silly, you know that, said Amanda. Besides, we met him, didn't we, at your sister's wedding? A tap on the inner door came from another world. They both swung round to stare at the handle as it turned. Campion's servant, Lug, came tiptoeing in. Watch out, he said. They're on the doorstep. Who? It was Amanda who spoke. She seemed perfectly normal and at ease. The police are downstairs. The inspector is in the lounge, and he's got 2 men just outside on the door. You've got a hornet's nest on your tail, and no mistake. The high street was dark and empty, but as he turned down the hill, the row started behind him. Shouts and heavy footsteps echoed from the side streets. Someone behind blew a police whistle. The lighting restrictions were on his side. His uncanny gift for finding his way in the dark, and above all his tremendous speed, were going to save him, if he was lucky. He kept to the wall, found some stone steps, and emerged to find himself just across the road from a railway station. He could hear a train panting in the station. Last train just going, said the booking clerk, slamming down the ticket and the change on the brass ledge. Campion snatched it and fled. The collector at the top of the stairs did not wait to clip his ticket. Express right through. There she goes, might just do it. Run, sir. The train was already chugging away from the platform, gathering speed at every gasping breath. Campion sprinted after it and just managed to swing himself onto the footboard of the last coach. Ignoring the warning shouts behind him, he got the door of the final compartment open, and, as stale leather-scented air gushed out to meet him, he clambered into a first-class smoker. He had just slammed the door behind him and had flung himself into a corner under one of the small blue reading lights with relief in his heart, when the train stopped with a jerk. They had caught him. That was his first thought. The police had followed him and stopped the train. He was trapped, caught as surely as if hands were already on his shoulder. As the heavy door swung open, a hurrying figure hurled itself in on top of him. That's all right. I'm quite all right. Very much obliged to you. Good night." The newcomer spoke over his shoulder to someone in the darkness. "Good night, sir. No trouble at all. Good night," an official voice answered deferentially, and the guard's whistle sounded down the platform. The train started with a jerk which unsteadied both men, and Campion retired to his corner. It was another belated traveller, that was all. The other man had settled himself diagonally opposite, and was blowing gently in the semi-darkness. He was small and elderly, and seemed taken up with his own close shave. Campion dug himself farther into the soft, old-fashioned upholstery. Here at last was a breather. Time to think if his mind would work. Very carefully, he reviewed all the concrete evidence which the last 30 hours had produced. Pine and his surveys limited, the professional crooks and the method of Anskam's murder. Then there were the mysterious masters of bridge themselves, the fleet of lorries, Anskam's sudden decision to draw all his money in cash. Then there was the cash which Campion had brought in to lug, the other cash which Weaver B had offered, the parcel of cash which Anskam had forgotten to bring in from the car. 15. Minute 15. The fact that it wasn't a date. The other man in the compartment stirred. As the younger man raised his head, the stranger spoke, revealing a deep, elderly voice, faintly suspicious, as such voices often are. "I've seen your face before," he said accusingly. "Where was that? Aren't you Albert Campion?" Campion froze. Good God, was the whole world after him? Of course it was. "No," he said huskily. "No, that's not my name. I don't think we've met." "Oh, no? Perhaps not. Perhaps not." The voice sounded partially satisfied, but its owner did not relax. He was staring at Campion unwinkingly, with unexpectedly shrewd eyes. It was quite possible that they had met, of course, in the far-off lucid days 36 hours ago. Campion began to feel for a name which he might give if asked point-blank. There was a long pause, and then the shrewd eyes rested on the younger man again. "I could have sworn you were Albert Campion," he said. "It must be because I've been hearing about him tonight." His only hope was to take his mind off the subject and to talk of something else. Campion searched wildly for a likely opening. Who was this old man? A businessman? A wool merchant? What would interest a wool merchant if the wretched man was in wool? Sheep, perhaps? No, that was absurd. He was losing his grip on reality altogether. This was madness. Oh, God, what was he going to say next? The old man leant back in his seat and crossed his short legs. "We've always fought our wars with money," he remarked. "I wonder if it's going to save us now." Money. Of course. Campion could have laughed aloud. Why hadn't he thought of it before? Everybody was interested in money. It was a universal subject. "I don't know," he said cautiously, choosing the safest lead. "It's not to be confused with wealth, of course." "No," said the old man briefly. "No, it's not. But as it stands now, in its present position, it's a very important factor all the same." As the train approached London, Campion became increasingly anxious. Detectives were almost certain to be there to meet it. They could hardly hang him for murder in his present condition, and almost anything would be preferable to this continuous hounding down. However, that was out of the question. He had a job to do, and he must do it at whatever cost. "The unspeakable peril of forced inflation," droned the voice on the other side of the compartment. "The loss of faith in the country's essential soundness." Campion smiled at the man and nodded to him without hearing. How comfortingly ordinary he was. "We're just coming in," he said. "Can't you feel us slowing down?" The old man was opening the carriage door. "What's that?" There was a muttering which Campion could not catch, and then his travelling companion glanced over his shoulder. "I'm afraid there's some trouble," he remarked. "The police are looking for someone on the train." "Oh? What do they want us to do?" Once again there was a murmur from the official in the darkness. "Quite," said the old man. "Very sensible." Then, turning to Campion, "They've shut off the main platform. This last coach is just outside the barrier. The fellow here suggests he takes our tickets for us, and we go down the footway to the road. You'll want a cab, won't you?" "Yes, please." Campion stumbled across the platform, which was littered with goods trolleys, milk churns, and mail bags. On his right, beyond the police-lined barrier, there was all the usual confusion of arrival. The detectives were waiting farther on at the ticket gate, no doubt. Meanwhile, his own getaway was made absurdly easy. No one took the least notice of him. The railway official led the old man, and Campion followed the pair of them. That was all there was to it. His travelling companion was obviously a constant passenger on this particular train. He must have been in the habit of using the final coach, and doubtless this was his regular porter who was waiting to meet him. They came out at last onto a narrow road on the goods side of the station. The old man's car was waiting for him, and he nodded to Campion as he climbed into it. A taxi crawled forward out of the darkness. "Where to, sir?" "The Treasury," said Campion briefly, and climbed inside. The cab moved forward at once. There was no questioning, no delay, no pause at the station gates. He could hardly believe it. He had got away as neatly and smoothly as if he had been a ghost. A sudden thought occurred to him, and he rapped on the window. The taxi drew into the curb, and the driver turned to peer through the glass screen. "Yes, sir?" "What time is it?" "Just on 5:15, sir." "In the morning?" "Lummy, I hope so." Campion was thinking. He must see Sir Henry Bull at the Treasury. But even in his half-witted state, he had enough sense to realize that no cabinet minister is liable to be available at his office before 5 in the morning. He asked the cabby to drop him at Trafalgar Square and cut down behind the National Gallery into the narrow streets beyond. He finally found a big tea shop, went inside, and bought himself some breakfast. The food restored him considerably. He was surprised to find how much he needed it, and how much more intelligent he became after eating it. He began to see some things with painful clarity. If he was to get any help from Sir Henry Bull, he must get it at once, before any news from Bridge reached that distinguished gentleman. That was evident. The thing to do was to get hold of him at once, at his private house. The one vital consideration at the moment was to reach someone in real authority before the police held everything up by arresting him and letting the law take its majestic course. After breakfast, he walked to the nearest public library, where he consulted a battered who's who. The man was there all right. Bull, the Right Honourable Henry Paterson, Knight, created 1911, MP, Honorary Member of the Universities of Oxford, St Andrews, Leeds, Senior Master of Bridge. Senior Master of Bridge. The words stared out of the tiny print at him, enlarging themselves before his eyes. What a fool! What a trebly mentally defective cretin! Of course. Miss Anskam had told him that the masters were holding their meeting on the 14th. The man must have been there in the very town he himself had fled from. His home address was there too, 52 Pitchley Square. It seemed scarcely worthwhile going there in the circumstances, but he decided to try it, because he could think of no alternative. He reached the square by taxi, then continued on foot towards the house. Then he saw the two men. One of them rose from the edge of the sand bin where he had been sitting under a tree in the square and sauntered forward. Police, of course. All these public men's houses had police guards these days. Why should he have forgotten that? One of the men was coming directly towards him. What should he do? Run for it and have all London at his heels? It was the little mock salute which stopped him, that and the man's obvious embarrassment. "Sergeant Cook, sir," said the stranger, his smile twisting wryly. "You've forgotten me, I expect." They stood there for a moment in silence, and Campion glanced up at number 52. "I want to see Sir Henry Bull," he said slowly, hardly trusting his voice. "Can you fix it? I want a word or two with him in private. I don't have to explain, do I?" "I'll get you, sir. There's a side door on the left there. It leads through to the yard at the back." They passed through a warm little servants' hall, where a couple of maids eyed them inquisitively, ascended a back staircase, crossed a flagged inner hall, and finally reached a white-panelled door. "He's having breakfast," whispered the sergeant, "but he's alone. Lady Bull has just left him." He knocked and listened. "There you are, sir," he added, and opened the door. Campion went into a small, bright room which glowed with flowers and smelt pleasantly of coffee. A breakfast table was set in the window, and a man in a dressing-gown sat at it with his back to the door. He turned at the sound of the latch and smiled affably at his visitor. "Hello, my boy," he said. "I half expected you." Campion said nothing. The world was reeling dangerously, and he felt his scalp contract. It was the old man he had met in the train. The old man indicated a chair on the other side of the table. "Sit down," he said. "Have some coffee. Don't look at me like that. I know I've been very obtuse." Campion blinked. He began to feel impervious to surprise. He sat down obediently, but did not dare to open his mouth. Sir Henry Bull cleared his throat. He looked very uncomfortable. "You've had a most nerve-wracking experience, I don't doubt," he said. "Until we got into the terminus this morning, I had no inkling of the extraordinary situation. That's the world we're living in today. I can't get into tune with it as fast as perhaps I ought. Enemy soldiers disguised as nuns, carrying machine guns and portable bicycles descending by parachute, armed secret societies, microphones in the walls of railway carriages. I did no actual harm, I hope. The police got their man, no doubt." Campion snatched at his scattering wits and faced the situation. Microphones in the walls of railway carriages. Was it possible that the old boy actually thought— He did, obviously. "I do realize I must have put you in a very difficult position. You see, when they stopped the train for me at Coachingford, and I found you in my reserved carriage, I immediately thought that you wanted a word with me in private. It never went through my head that you were there to look after me, and that we might be overheard or overlooked. To be frank, I didn't understand your manner in the least, although it ought to have warned me." Sir Henry was so unused to making mistakes that he was still offering explanations in his own defence. "I do want to see you," Campion said. "I want to talk about Anskam." "Anskam?" Sir Henry frowned. "Poor fellow. I heard about him as soon as I arrived, of course. What do you want to know?" Why did Anskam convert every halfpenny he possessed into cash, and then debate in his own mind if he ought not to come and see you? Did he? Sir Henry was surprised, but not bewildered. He was a silly fellow. I've known him for years, of course. He was too small a man altogether for his commitments. That's the weakness of these hereditary appointments. Between ourselves, we financed him over and over again, but finally we had to put a stop to it. What was he going to do? Try to make a dash from his local creditors? Campion shook his head. His sister seems to have had a rather different idea. She suggests that he may have been going to make some sort of gesture, in expiation, were the words she used. To me? Really? What for? Miss Anskam wondered if he had allowed the caverns in the Nag to be used for contraband. Really? I can't believe that. That would have been sacrilege. No, I don't think so. I fancy I know where that story comes from. I think a great deal of wine was actually taken into the Nag some time before the war. It represented a sum of money which was due to us for the sale of our share of a Rhenish vineyard. Anskam would probably be responsible for the storage of the wine. That was the kind of thing he did attend to. He had nothing to do with the main function of the Brotherhood. Which is? The welfare of our country, young man." It was an oddly dignified answer, completely unaffected. "Our principal business is the Institute," Sir Henry added more specifically. "That place is a great national possession." It was now or never, and the ground was very uncertain. "Tell me about minute 15. Once the question was out of his mouth, the deepest misgivings seized him as he saw astonishment growing in the intelligent eyes. "Minute 15? The man was not at ease. He seemed puzzled and slightly alarmed. "I don't know what I can tell you that you don't know already," he said at last. "What do you want from me? The financial details of the actual loan?" "Why was the loan called minute 15? He ventured. "Ah, I see your difficulty. That was confusing." Sir Henry seemed relieved. "It wasn't. The defence loan had its own name, the 50 Victory. Minute 15 simply covers the plan of its presentation, its number on the agenda of the Cabinet meeting which approved it. We must have no hitch whatever in raising the money. We are edging along such a precipice now that I hardly dare watch, and I am no coward where money is concerned. Use your common sense. Would we ever embark on a gigantic and drastic project like this, which virtually means that we are putting the British Empire on a company footing, with a personal invitation to every taxpayer to invest his all in it, if it wasn't absolutely vital? The forms which are going out tonight are, practically speaking, prospectuses. There is no other word for them. We're walking on the water. It's only the faith of the man in the street which is going to hold us from going under." Campion sat very still. It was coming. Behind the curtain hanging across his mind like an arras, something of tremendous importance was trying to shine through. He could feel the emotion belonging to it. It was fear. "Nothing must go wrong," he said stupidly. Sir Henry Bull pushed back his chair. "One of my informants named you as probably the only man who knew the full truth of the danger. I am not going to ask you for information, so you can take that blank expression off your face. It is true that at this moment Britain depends practically entirely on her faith in herself and on her own internal stability. If that could be destroyed suddenly by a single stroke, there would come confusion, exhaustion, and finally decay. I cannot and will not believe that the incredible story which I have heard has any reality, but if it has, Campion, well then, the Dark Ages again. That's what it will mean." It was the same story. Everyone was turning to himself for assurance. He dared not reveal the dreadful emptiness of his mind. He was quite alone. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I don't know. These prospectuses, or whatever they are, for minute 15, they go out tonight, do they?" "Yes. I can't understand why you didn't realize that. Only taxpayers will be approached, of course, but that's half the country. It must not fail, Campion. Nothing must happen to make it fail, or to—" He shook his head. "That eventuality won't bear considering." He was interrupted by the arrival of the secretary, who came in with a word of apology and murmured to Sir Henry for some time in a deferential flow. "Really?" The old man was surprised. "Where is he? In the house?" "In the study, Sir Henry." As the secretary went out, he turned to Campion. "I'm afraid I must see this fellow," he said. "He's a curious product, part genius, part crank. One moment he's doing untold service, and the next he's trying to advance a harebrained scheme for running the country." He went out. Campion heard Sir Henry's voice as he entered the room across the hall. "Hello, Aubrey. What's this awful warning, my dear boy?" Lee Aubrey, the head of the Institute at Bridge. Campion's hand closed over the doorknob. Of course. Aubrey had been going to see Miss Anskam. She must have given him an account of her interview with himself and Amanda, and now he was warning his distinguished governor that a lunatic was at large. There was nothing for it but flight again. He stepped out into the hall and went straight from the house the way he had come. He was shaking with suppressed excitement. It was all there in his hand, but he held it without knowing what it was. In his miserable ignorance he could not identify it. He must get back to Bridge. That was the all-important factor. It must be now nearly 11. He had, he suspected, until the provincial post went at about 6 in the evening. He found a taxi and made the station in 20 minutes. Luck was with him, and he discovered a Coachingford train actually waiting on the platform. He entered it in a state as near jubilation as he ever remembered. When at last the train carried him into the station at Coachingford, he was already in his mind looking for the narrow passage by the side of the shop which would give him entry to the cavern under the nag. He was so engrossed with his project that he did not see the 2 plain-clothes-men standing behind the ticket collector until their hands fell on his shoulders, and he heard the strangely familiar form of arrest. Campion sat in a cell at the Waterhouse Street police station at Coachingford and prayed. He was a damned fool. He knew that. If only he had at least gone quietly and had given himself a chance. If only he hadn't lost his head in the station booking office as they were taking him through. Now they were leaving him here to cool his heels. God knew what the charges against him were. What was important was the time. Somehow or other, he'd got to get out and get down to Bridge immediately. More than likely the lorries stuffed with counterfeit notes in the Nag's cavern were even now setting out on their journeys to distribute it all over the country. All he knew were those things which were set out under his nose: the lorries, the date of the launching of the Minute 15 loan, the work at the Institute, and the wine cases in the Nag. He must get out. Oh God, dear God, he must get out. The charge sergeant appeared with a young constable. Campion's voice sounded strangled and hysterical. "Get in touch with Lady Amanda Fitton at the principal's house at the Bridge Institute." "All in good time, my lad," said the charge sergeant. "Meanwhile, if you could wait a minute, I'll just charge you, if you don't mind. We don't want to do anything against the book, do we?" "Send for Superintendent Hutch," Campion implored in panic. Hutch was at least intelligent. Angry and suspicious he probably was, but at least his mind worked. Perhaps he could be got to see the hideous urgency of the occasion. The charge sergeant was scandalized. "Superintendent Hutch has quite enough to do without bothering himself about you. If he wants to see you, he'll come in his own time. Now then, Albert Campion, you are charged in that you did feloniously utter counterfeit banknotes to the value of £1 at the railway station booking office." Campion ceased to hear. He went deaf and blind. A great avalanche of fury at their incompetence descended over him, sweeping away every shred of his control. Good God, they couldn't even charge him with something he'd done. The door was opened behind him, and he did the fatal thing. As he sprang for the rectangle of light, the charge sergeant seized him. Campion slung him off, pitching him half across the room. The young constable raised a great fist, and Campion took the blow just under the ear. The force of it lifted him off his feet and sent him sprawling across the boards. Polished wood met his left temple with a crack which echoed round the building. He fell into complete darkness and lay still. Albert Campion came to himself in the cell. He felt his head cautiously. Yes, there it was. A very nasty, spongy little spot, by Jiminy. There must have been 5 or 6 in the gang at the quayside, all pros and all using coshes. But where was Oates? What had happened to him in the fight? He went over to the Judas window in the cell door and peered through it into the empty passage outside. Not a soul, of course. He sighed and, putting his fingers to his mouth, gave a very reliable imitation of a police whistle. The turnkey, puce in the face with fury, put his head in at the farther door. "Shop," said Campion pleasantly. "Can I see the manager?" "You'll be lucky if you see fresh air again, my lad." "As a metropolitan man," Campion continued, "I don't like to criticize your county arrangements, but just to soothe my curiosity, do tell me, when you bring in a concussion case, do you usually leave it for the best part of a day and a night without medical attention?" The turnkey gaped at him, his small eyes bewildered. "You're crackers, and you're impudent," he said. "You've only been in an hour and a half. What do you think this is, a quick lunch counter?" he said, and went out, locking the door behind him. Campion was astounded. He had always found county police particularly intelligent. This type of crass idiocy was new to him. The whole thing was really damnably unfortunate. Besides, he'd got work to do. There was that date with Superintendent Hutch to go over the nag, and he wanted to have a look at the Institute at Bridge. Well then, to return to business. When Oates had borrowed him from headquarters and had first come out with this staggering tale of thousands of counterfeit notes, so perfect that one has to boil them down to detect them, he had said that he thought the scheme was on a colossal scale, and might actually be aiming at some sort of sudden unofficial inflation, which would of course pitch the country's whole economy into hell, destroy public confidence, pull down the government, and, if issued at the right moment, bring about the moral collapse of the nation. Oates had shown him the notes, which had been found in 2 or 3 industrial towns. They had certainly been cracking good forgeries, and could have been manufactured only in the official printing houses of an enemy power. Moreover, they had been artificially dirted most ingeniously. All of Oates's men had drawn a blank, save the man at Coachingford. He had reported the presence of some sort of crook organization, either in the town or at the neighbouring town of Bridge. Poor chap, he hadn't got much further. They'd fished him out of the estuary with a broken neck. Well, Oates had borrowed him and sent him to Coachingford. Amanda had got them both an invitation to stay at Bridge with Lee Aubrey, who was brilliant, he supposed. Everybody said so. Personally, he suspected these academic dreamers. Still, let that pass. He had instated old Lug, his servant, in the town with a stock of the counterfeit and some old clothes. Then he had spent half a day at Bridge making arrangements, had come into Coachingford, changed into a tramp's outfit, and had gone off reconnoitering. He had discovered that a whisper was going round the riffraff of the town to the effect that the great day was coming on the 16th. That was going to be milk and honey day, the day when it was going to be everybody's duty to spend, and the wherewithal was going to be miraculously provided. That had been a peculiarly uncomfortable discovery, because the 16th was to be a red-letter day in other, more orthodox financial circles. On the 16th, the Minute 15 defence loan was to be presented to the public. Economic collapse at this moment would change the whole course of the war. For a long time it had been impossible to locate any of these generous agents of milk and honey, and he had finally decided to take the bull by the horns and appear himself as one of them. That had drawn the flock. The whole bunch had turned up together, as he had known they would. Then there had been the fight, and the police had come up. He remembered very little of the action. Since the police had no idea who he and Oates were, they had been extraordinarily lucky to get away alive. He got up and walked irritably up and down the cell. This knock on the head was serious. It was having an extraordinary effect on him. They could finish this thing off quickly and release him to his work again. Perhaps there would be time to marry Amanda in the interim. If only what? He glanced ruefully at his clothes and made a discovery which took him completely off his balance. He was not wearing the suit in which he had had the quayside fight. He stared into the cloth of his trouser knees and wrenched at the inside pocket of his jacket to find the tailor's label. It was his suit, all right. He recognized it, and knew, too, that it should have been hanging up in a wardrobe in his bedroom in Lee Aubrey's house in Bridge. Moreover, it was a new suit, according to the date on the label, yet as he looked at it now, he saw that it was dirty and crumpled and showed signs of having had hard wear for some little time. The jolt to his nervous system was tremendous, the mental equivalent of a gigantic thump between the shoulder blades. Then a frightful misgiving crept up close to him and laid its cold cheek on his heart. He had been here some time. How long? He saw Amanda through the Judas window, and suddenly he saw it all in a single dreadful moment of revelation. The whole kaleidoscopic history of the last 36 hours, painted with pitiless clarity and minute detail, unfolded before him in all its stark gravity. A mad, uncomic strip, with himself wandering blindfold through it like a lost soul. Then, as his two minds and personalities merged at last, the three-dimensional truth suddenly sprang out in blazing colours. He stood petrified. Good God Almighty! He knew now what the contraband was in those cases in the hill under the nag, which the wretched Anskam had been bribed to accept as honest Rhine wine. It could only be the counterfeit, the artificially dirtied, indetectable counterfeit itself. Millions and millions of pounds worth of lies and disruption. Anskam had been murdered because he was preparing to salve his conscience and to confess to the contents of those packing cases. Then there were the lorries. They were for the distribution, obviously. How the enemy would make the sober, suspicious British public accept and spend this dynamite was still a mystery. But the time, the hour of striking, was not. The hour was now. Perhaps this very minute. It had all come back to him. He knew where he was. He knew what he had got to do. "Look, my darling," he said, aware of the state of affairs between them, aware of their long but now broken engagement, aware of his loss and its magnitude, and thrusting it out of his mind because of the racing minutes and the disaster ahead. "I've got to get out of here. Listen, Amanda, I've got to go down to the nag." "Yes, I see," she said, and turned on her heel at once. The turnkey came back a moment later. Campion began to suffer the tortures of the damned. "Now look here, this is serious. This is 1,000,000 times more important and more urgent than any air raid siren. Either fetch me the most senior officer in the building, or let me use the telephone at once. This is vital. If you don't bring me someone in authority immediately, I don't think you'll wake up in the same world tomorrow morning." "Threats, eh?" said the turnkey with idiot satisfaction, and wandered off down the corridor. A man appeared at the Judas window. Campion's first despairing impression was that the man was a stranger. He stooped to pass through the doorway, and he was wearing a scarf wrapped round the lower part of his face. As he lifted his head, however, Campion knew him. It was Superintendent Hutch. The scarf took Campion off his guard. "Hutch," he said softly. The man came over to the door and looked in through the window. He did not speak, and his blue eyes were very bleak. Campion took a deep breath. "I must have a word with you," he said quietly. "I know there's a hell of a lot to explain. I've been walking around punch-drunk for the best part of 2 days. However, you shall have chapter and verse for everything in an hour or so, but just at the moment there's something that's got to be done. We've got to go to Bridge. We've got to get to the nag at once. My dear fellow, you needn't let me out of your sight." Hutch stepped back from the Judas window and unlocked the cell door. "Oh, thank God, man!" Campion's cry of relief came from his soul. Campion opened his mouth to speak, but got no farther. Hutch had turned to the wall and was scribbling a line or two on the back of an envelope taken from his pocket. The message was enlightening. Just located Oates. Has been St. Jude's Hospital, unconscious since Tuesday night. Has been under police guard in error. Was thought to have killed copper in street fight on Quay. Police here bloody fools. Oates just come round, and Doc says thinks out of danger." Understanding came to Campion. Of course. That explained it at last. The policeman and the nurse and that incredible conversation he had overheard from his bed in the huge deserted ward. They could never have been talking about himself. They must have been discussing poor old Oates, who was probably lying in a little private room leading off the main ward. Now he had his wits about him, that much was obvious. When a police constable watches a man in bed, he watches him from a chair at the foot of that bed and does not stand about in a passage. Yet it had all seemed very convincing at the time. Hutch was still scribbling. "Lady Amanda found him. Sent for me. Understand it's urgent. She's outside with the car." "Is she?" Campion leapt to the door. "You'll want 20 or 30 armed men," he said over his shoulder. "Bring them to the nag at once. It's desperate. What's the time?" 4:50. Hutch wrote the figures, and Campion had to step back to look at them. "What's the matter with you?" he demanded, as the oddity of the proceeding suddenly occurred to him. Hutch gave him a slow, sidelong glance, and his hand began to move again. "You've cracked my ruddy jaw, blast you," he wrote. "Get on with it. I'm following." Campion stepped out of the comparative calm of Coachingford Police Station into a world of exuberant speed. The car was at the curb with the engine running. Amanda slid out of the driving seat and handed over the wheel. "I say," she said, "God bless Hutch. That man hasn't a grudge in his make-up, Albert." Campion was taking the last of the town at speed towards the neighbouring town of Bridge. For the first time for what seemed a lifetime, he was in full possession of all his senses, and the condition seemed to have its disadvantages. For one thing, he was acutely aware that Amanda was beside him. In the lonely and terrified ignorance of his amnesia, she had emerged as a necessity, a lifeline, heaven-sent and indispensable. To lose her now to Lee Aubrey. Losing her would be losing an eye. How could he have failed to marry her when he had the chance? "Hurry," she said at his side. "Hurry, and we'll do it." Things could hardly be worse. Time was certain to beat him before he could beat the counterfeiters. An idea slid into his mind complete. A memory of a visit to a scientist at the Bridge Institute, young Butcher. It was wild and probably suicidal, but it did contain one very slender thread of hope. He drove straight to the Institute, and leaving the car outside the gates, went in past the sentry on foot. 5 minutes later he came back, walking very fast. He drove into the town with unusual caution, and stopped at the top of the Pickle, the hill looming up over them, dirty and grey in the evening light. "You take the car," he said urgently. "Go and find Superintendent Hutch and tell him to block the coast road both ways. No single lorry must get out." "Right." She nodded and took the wheel again. "They probably won't get here in time," she said, catching his eye. "You've got a scheme in case of that, I take it?" He grinned. "I've only got this lucky bean in my pocket, plus a profound and lovely faith in myself," he said. She echoed his expression, her eyes as affectionately derisive as his own. "Then I'll pray," she said cheerfully. "Goodbye. See you at dinner or in the Elysian fields." Campion hurried. He swung down the narrow passage beside the little old-fashioned shop under the nag, where Hutch had taken him in his confusion. He found the storeroom door standing wide, and walked straight in, nodding briefly to the startled boy who stood weighing dried fruit in the back of the building. Once inside, he began to climb through the passages in the hill, praying against giddiness and keeping one hand tightly clasped over his coat pocket. A great change had come over the master's storerooms. The packing cases were empty, and the great cabins in confusion, as if an army had been at work there. He pushed on, feeling like a hurrying snail, with all the world depending on his speed. The iron ladders required very cautious negotiation in the half-dark, and he had his precious coat pocket to take care of during the descent. Finally, he turned the right-angled bend cautiously and looked out into the Nag's trough. It made an amazing picture. The only light in the high cavern came from the masked headlamps of thousands of lorries and vans, all loaded to capacity with bursting sacks. He kept flat against the dark wall of rock and edged farther along. The whole place was alive with people, but voices were kept down and the roar of engines predominated. He knew the trucks and vans must all be loaded up with financial dynamite, freight far more dangerous than ammunition. It was the counterfeit, all right. Campion strained his eyes through the gloom. That creep Pine was in the far corner, calmly checking trucks over on a timesheet as if he had been running a goods yard. The exhaust fumes were growing worse up in the roof. Campion felt himself swaying, and he put out his arms to steady himself. The sudden movement must have caught the attention of someone in the crowd below, for a shout went up, and immediately the wide beam of a powerful torch began to rake the ledge on which he stood. Campion made up his mind. As the torch beam came nearer, he drew the little steel egg from his coat pocket and pulled out the pin. It had been really disgracefully easy to steal it from Butcher's workshop at the Institute. Below him the trucks trembled and steamed. The torch beam was within a yard of him. It was now or never. The egg sailed through the air. At the same moment the torch beam got him, and he dropped forward on his face as a bullet spat at him. The next moment the world pancaked. There was very little noise, but it was as though some gigantic animal had placed its lips to the entrance of the cavern and had sucked in very sharply, only to blow out again immediately afterwards. There was a rumble, and the exit to the coast road disappeared under several tons of earth and limestone sliding down from the Nag. The roar of fire followed as a score of petrol tanks exploded, and the whole of the upper half of the cavern became a mass of flying paper. Campion scrambled to his knees. Blood was trickling into his mouth, but he was alive. Below him there was a sea of blazing petrol and paper and the fumes of smouldering sacks. Millions of envelopes covered the place like a fall of brown snow. Injured men swore and died under their lorries, while others fought each other in their attempt to clamber onto the ledge. Campion gathered up a handful of the envelopes which were still fluttering down over him, and, using every ounce of strength left in his body, he crawled painfully towards the mouth of the passage. Hutch and his handful of men found him at the foot of the first iron ladder. The superintendent sat down by Campion on the stones, and they looked at the envelopes together. On His Majesty's service was printed across the front of each in the standard ink and type, as was also the black franc mark, the familiar crown in the circle. Each envelope was, in fact, exactly the same as any of those others which were being circulated officially in millions on behalf of the Minute 15 defence loan. By the light of the superintendent's torch, Campion opened one of the packets. It was addressed to a Mr. P. Carter, 2 Lysander Cottages, Netherland Road, Bury-under-Lyne, and it contained 7 of the spurious and artificially dirted banknotes, as well as a buff-coloured printed slip, the text of which was masterly in its uncomplicated wickedness. The Ministry of Labour, Whitehall, London, S.W. Dear Sir, Madam, the enclosed sum of £7 has been awarded to you on the War Bonus Claims Committee's recommendation. This money is paid to you under the arrears of remuneration for persons of incomes below tax level board, as has been announced in the public press and elsewhere. Note: you will help your country if you do not hoard this money, but translate it into goods immediately. R. W. Smith, Comptroller. It was very obvious. Someone had simply got hold of the registers belonging to the various social service schemes functioning in the poorer districts of the industrial towns. These would contain between them the names of most of the permanently unemployed and those who had ever received help from state or local bodies. Campion held his breath. It all pointed directly to Pine again. Lists of addresses of that kind would be just his speciality. The evil genius of the proposal lay in the fact that the windfall was to appear to come directly from the one authority from whom the recipients would accept money without question. The only thing any government could hope to do was to admit the notes as legal tender and accept the consequences, however terrible they might turn out to be. It would be quite impossible to take the money back. By synchronizing the plan with the launching of Minute 15, at a time when the authorities were prepared for an enormous influx of official letters, the GPO was to be neatly tricked into rendering vital assistance and ensuring that the secret blow would fall at the same moment in every part of the land. But who had the mind and the facilities to do this? Sir Henry Bull's description of Lee Aubrey came back very vividly to Campion. He's a curious product, part genius, part crank. One moment he's doing untold service, and the next he's trying to advance a harebrained scheme for running the country. Some time later, Campion leant against the wall in Lee Aubrey's gracious, comfortable study and considered the scene before him. The room was very quiet. The two constables on the door stood stiffly. Sir Henry Bull, junior lord of the Treasury, and his fellow masters of bridge were anxious and constrained. Lee Aubrey himself stood on the hearthrug, with a plain-clothes man on either side of him. He looked astonished and faintly irritated, but there was no trace of alarm in his big-boned face. The evidence against that fellow Pine, who was killed, is of course conclusive, said Sir Henry. I think there is no doubt that he must have been the moving spirit, ventured Aubrey's solicitor. My dear chap, don't be an ass, interjected Aubrey himself. I employed Pine, and he was doing his work very efficiently until he was stopped. My plan would have put the economic life of the country on an entirely new basis. Since I could not get a government to see reason by argument, I realized I had to smash their existing economy and create a chaos in which they would automatically turn to the one man who could save them. That's perfectly clear. So I found the man Pine, and through him I arranged to engineer the greatest crash in history, so that in picking up the pieces I could restore a decent order at last. You're following me, of course. Sir Henry passed a stubby hand through his hair. His lips were grey. He looked very tired. You have not explained the part you were to play in this new government of yours, he said. I should have to have exactly the same power in the country as I have here at the Bridge Institute, of course, he said. That surely is obvious. When there is so much of passionate importance to be done quickly and ruthlessly, then the man in charge must assume full responsibility. Campion pulled himself away from the wall and edged his way past the distinguished company, out of the room, through the hall, and out of the house. He felt physically ill. It was another clear, bright night with visibility nearly as good as day. Presently Amanda joined him. I tell you one thing, he said. Even if he hadn't turned out to be this particular kind of lunatic, you would never have married him. No, I wouldn't. He looked down at her and caught her grinning to herself. Are you laughing? He demanded. Only at me. Campion put an arm round her and held the small circle of her shoulder bone. Let's get married early tomorrow, he said. I've only got 36 hours leave. "Yes," said Amanda. "It's time we got married."